Let's maybe start there a little bit, Rick, and maybe pick up where the film left off. What's kind of changed when we talk about hockey in Russia and kind of the passion they have for this sport? Since it's kind of opened up.
Thanks, Rick. I'd like to go back to that scene with Alex Ovechkin in the film. It's an interesting thing to think about how sports is impacted by patriotism, by nationalism. Alex is as fervent a Russian, as loyal to his country as anybody I can imagine. And in fact, it's caused him to a difficult balancing act between his personal life, his professional career, and what he believes are his responsibilities to his national team. So I don't think that's changed, and I loved that movie. But I wouldn't want anybody to walk away with it assuming that players feel differently about their native country, whether it's Russia or frankly, I mean, as you know, if you've watched the NHL, a huge number of the players come from outside of the United States and Canada. And I think, that sense of national responsibility remains, but they are now professionals and they have responsibilities to their adopted country and to their teams. You've got 34 players who were born in the former Soviet Union playing in the NHL today. So it's a pretty huge amount of players. There's tremendous talent coming out of those countries and out of those systems. But it's interesting to see the value of teamwork as demonstrated by the success of the Red Army, and to think about how that plays out in all the sports that you write about, all the sports we watch, but certainly in hockey. And the teams that are able to play as a single unit tend to do better than those who have great individual talents but don't mesh as well.
I thought it was interesting the point they made that today's leaders in Russia are really products of the Soviet system. And we really have kind of come full circle with the Sochi Olympics. We have this guy Putin that wanted to really showcase his country and a new world there by hosting the Olympics and by really putting a lot of pressure on the hockey team this year. What do you think the takeaway from Russia hosting the games this year and the struggles the hockey team had, not just for individuals like Alex Ovechkin, but for that country in general?
Well, I think you've got to kind of look at this with...
You know what, I'm not sure. I am probably reaching back row here so we don't get feedback. You have to look at it with a certain amount of dispassion and humility, because I think every country that hosts the Olympics ends up trying to use patriotism to drive the results of their team. It's kind of the national corollary to home team advantage, right? So we saw what appeared to us, I think, as Americans, as a very politicized Olympics this last time. And there's no question that was the objective that Putin and the government had for it. And I think the teams wanted to play for their team to win as well, and each of the individuals. But it's a different era. These teams are now composed of players who haven't grown up together or haven't played together for a really long time. And the dynamic that made the Red Army possible doesn't exist when you're not going through that just incredibly intense collective action to build a team. And in fact, it was odd in these Olympics because you got professionals going back mid-season. They're worried about getting injured and harming their regular team. They feel a tremendous amount of pressure on them for the aspirations of their country. It's just it's a really tough dynamic. And I would expect it to play out this way, you know, with a number of hosts of the Olympics. This was a pretty politicized Olympics, as you know, we saw demonstrated.
So maybe we'll get to questions and your reactions to the film too, but some of the footage, the on-ice action footage of those teams was beautiful. It looked like a ballet and the way they moved the puck around. And then, you know, we heard Slava kind of talking about some of the reaction he got when he first came over. Are there still stereotypes that the Russian players face when they come here? I mean, they're still regarded as finesse players and maybe not as tough. Is it difficult for them to be integrated in the NHL system, or is it all a little bit more smoothly?
So I don't have the expertise to really comment on that. I'll do it as an individual watching a lot of hockey. Systems have changed pretty dramatically. I think you've got a couple things going on. One is the pressure put on professional athletes generally. The second is the pressures put on immigrants in that context and the expectations of them and the whole issue of how do I fit in, how does my spouse fit in, I don't understand the language. And all of those are difficult to overcome when you're trying to assimilate somebody into a team structure. I know when young Russian players have come to the cast, Alex has spent a tremendous amount of time working on exactly those issues because he knows what it's like to come into that circumstance, which we'd face if we went to play in Russia. In terms of toughness, these are tough guys. Really tough.
I'm not sure there's any player that has as much pressure on him as Alex does all the time. So it's not just his country, it's not just a contract that's supposed to pay him $100 million. And the Washington Post plays a role in that, I realize, but he carries a lot on his shoulders.
No, there's a lot of pressure, and you know, this is a sport that expects you to play as an individual and as a member of the team. And so and the physicality of it is astounding. If you ever get a chance to watch professional hockey from the glass, right up on the it will blow your mind. They are going real fast. They are really big people. They hit really, really hard, and they get hit really hard. So I think the expectations of the physicality of the sport have only escalated. I think the physical training for the players has only escalated. It's not, you know, quite as, I don't know, third world as the Soviet training system was. But it's interesting, you know, 1985, which was right in the midst of this period, was the year Rocky IV came out. And if you remember that film, the trope in the film was certainly, you know, free enterprise and freedom up against the totalitarian system. But the training of Ivan Drago, Dolph Lundgren in the film, he had every possible scientific convenience, you know, given to him. And then we see how these guys were really training back then. It's funny. But that was the dynamic that they were going for. And if you want to see the flip side of nationalism, go rewatch that film.
Why don't we see if there's any other reactions or questions that anyone had for Rick?
The question, their system was based on finesse, like you mentioned, but yet they were very tough. So when they came to the United States, the players took their toughness as fighters, but they were not fighting. How was that adjustment? Even though they recognized to be tough, they were not fighting.
Yeah, I think...
Repeat the question.
Yeah, sure. The question...
Oh, okay. I'll try it again. I just wanted to avoid the feedback. The question had to do with the difference in the system relative to fighting. In North American hockey, the expectation is you're going to fight. The role of enforcers is really important. There's a fantastic documentary called The Last Gladiator that really deals with that problem in an extraordinary way. And so the question was for Russian players who are taught to be tough but are not, where fighting does not play the same role in the game as it does in North America, what's the adjustment? It's definitely an adjustment for all of the European players where you can't fight in games. That's really, pretty much ground out of the game. And I think for a lot of folks who grew up in that system, it's just a weird thing to think that you'll stop the game and two guys will, drop gloves and fight. But it is certainly a current part of hockey in North America, and they make the adjustments. There was a game last year when there was a cheap shot taken on a Caps player, and Ovechkin came just flying across the ice and decked the guy. So you adopt.
Superb film. I think it's an Oscar contender. I had the pleasure of covering that team at the '83 Worlds in Munich, and also at Sarajevo for ABC Sports in '84. And a lot of people think that the elegance of that game is very largely due to
A lot of people think the elegance of the game is largely due to the much larger ice sheet that the IIHL uses. Do you think, Rick, that the NHL is going to come around to that larger ice sheet, especially the room behind the goal?
I have no idea. In all honesty, this has been an issue that's been talked about a great deal over the years, and as we start to watch more World Cup level games and the Olympics, and you see how that changes the dynamic of the game, and you think about soccer and lacrosse in particular, where you've got that space behind the goal, and that plays such a huge part in setting up offensive plays. It's a really interesting issue. It's talked about at the owner's level, at the coach's level. I'm not in those discussions and couldn't comment, but I think it's great as a fan. You should see it play both ways and come to your own judgments. It's great to have you here.
The question I have is, one of the things I thought was interesting that was left out of the film was, I think there's more of a rivalry between Canada and Canada and Russia from a hockey standpoint, but focus more on the political side of the film. The question I have is, how much do you think that hurts the United States, the fact that we have so many different sports for kids to play here? Do you think we'll ever get to that hockey powerhouse standpoint like Canada or Russia?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you have a pre-professional system such as existed in the Soviet Union and exists today in a bunch of different countries, and arguably exists in the United States in many sports, Olympic and non-Olympic sports, there are real advantages to approaching it that way. I think the U.S. Olympic system is trying to find a balance between all of the choices that young people have today in terms of their leisure time activities, all of the sports they can play, all the other demands on their time, and trying to inculcate a system that makes us competitive in sport. We don't have the financial support from the federal government to the various Olympic sport authorities in the United States. So we're under-resourced in a whole bunch of sports relative to some of our competitors. And it's really a choice that we make as taxpayers and as individuals, and it's something that changes over time as people get interested in a variety of different sports. But I don't know how that will play out over time. Certainly in the United States, there are more sports active for young people and more demands on their time than almost anywhere I can think of. And in Canada, hockey and lacrosse are really dominant. And when that happens, your best athletes go in that direction as they have here in the football. Money sports, tend to glow the brightest, and as you're a kid and you're growing up and you're watching it, you're watching money sports most particularly. But I think we are developing great hockey athletes here, within, frankly, the DC metro area. They're fantastic young people who are now beginning to be in the NHL's developmental system. And so, you'll continue to see that happen.
If you look at participation numbers in Northern Virginia, I mean, hockey's going up. A sport like football's fallen probably the last 3-4 years straight. But it's more of a place to have outlets after they're 12, 13. Hockey's not a high school sport in much parts of the country still.
It's a really difficult sport for families as well because ice time is so short. So when you talk to hockey parents, they're getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and driving an hour and a half to a rink, and very few other sports kind of require quite as much travel in travel leagues as in hockey. And I think that, makes it difficult for people to stick with it from a really young age on up. But there's a lot of excitement, and it comes out of the Olympics, and it comes out of the college game being getting more airtime on television, and then obviously the NHL.
Anyone else before we wrap it up and send everyone off to lunch?
What are your feelings on global warming? No, it's some of a funny question, but the reason I bring that up is I never played hockey. I wish I had. I didn't have that opportunity because I grew up over in Baltimore, Maryland, where you had short winters. But a lot of friends I've known and made over the years, Canada, up north, that's where they grew up, playing on frozen lakes and ponds and things like that. And they said, that's where they didn't have access to rinks, and hockey wasn't big like it is today. But they grew up in that period and everything. The question is semi-serious. Do you think global warming is affecting, maybe, even in Russia they talk about it, and other countries?
If you go on Snag Films, one of our 5,000 films is called Pond Hockey. It's a really great documentary. Gretzky's in it, a bunch of other folks, about how much the kind of capacity to go to the end of your street, get a little sheet of ice somewhere, and be able to play right there in the neighborhood impacted Canadians in particular, but others. It's a fun movie. You should check it out. The impact of the outdoor game and global warming, I can tell you that it is having an issue on the Winter Classic games that are played outdoors for the NHL, because it's possible, it's difficult, but it's possible in an arena to control the conditions on the ice. It's really, really tough to do it outdoors anywhere in the continental United States now. And we're going to have the Winter Classic here in DC, and it's going to be a tremendous amount of work because you can't have a bad surface. It makes a tremendous difference to the game and it risks the players.
Thank you.
Thank